Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of AlixTalks. This is the series in which business and thought leaders gather for conversations about leading through, managing, and anticipating change in a global economy driven by intensifying cycles of disruption. So what we're focusing on today is this idea of disruption. I'm Amna Nawaz, co-anchor of the PBS NewsHour. I'm delighted to be here today in conversation both with Simon Freakley, the Chief Executive Officer of AlixPartners. Simon, it's good to see you.
Thank you, Amna, and you too.
And with Ed Bastian, the Chief Executive Officer of Delta Airlines. Ed, it's great to see you. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, Amna.
So everyone out there joining us, thank you for being here. We're going to be taking your questions in real time, so please feel free to enter them into the chat. I'll be working them into the conversation as we go, and you can put them directly to Ed and to Simon. So Simon, let's kick us off here now. The headline from your 5th annual Disruption Index, which is a survey of more than 3,000 CEOs and senior executives around the world, is that while business leaders have gotten better about managing disruption after the last 3 intense years, there's a whole new set of newly emerging forces outside of their control that are kind of driving the agenda for 2024. So before we get into the details of it all, does it seem to you, from the CEOs you talk to, that disruption is sort of the new normal for business leaders?
Amna, that's absolutely the takeaway. And we started doing this disruption index work 5 years ago, just before the pandemic. And of course, then the mother of all disruptions affected all of us. And of course, when the pandemic was then behind us, we all sort of expected that things would calm down. But the takeaway, as you say, from this year's Disruption Index review and all of the interviews we've done is that the world is just as disrupted as it was during the pandemic years, just by other forces. And these forces are long-term and somewhat intractable, whether they're geopolitical, whether they're economic, whether they're due to technology, and particularly the emergence of generative AI. Disruption really is alive and well.
We're going to dig into a lot of those details. Ed, I think it's fair to say very few leaders know disruption in the way you have known it through your career. You have been at and led Delta through incredible moments of volatility and disruption. You were there during 9/11, through the competition with low-cost carriers, through a bankruptcy, a pandemic. Just big picture, give us a sense of how you view this idea of disruption.
Well, disruption is kind of at the core of our business model. One of the things that we know is that disruptions, while we may not be able to anticipate what exactly is going to occur, we know it's going to happen. And as I tell our team all the time, when something happens, oftentimes it's not for the good. It's something that we were not ready for in some way, or certainly had a negative impact on the operation. So whether it's a simple day of a flight, we were talking before the chat started here about the weather in New York over the last couple of days and some of the disruption that we had to manage through in getting our customers safely to their destinations, and our team did a masterful job because they were prepared, they were ready for it. Or the completely other side of the coin with the pandemic, where no one had any idea what was happening, much less being prepared for one. What we've learned in our business, and I've learned personally, is a lot about the concept of resilience in terms of being able to be confident and at some point, calm in managing through and not let the disruption get to your decision makers, so that your decisions just exacerbate the disruption you're going in. And disruptions happen in all types. It could happen core to generative AI and technology, which will clearly have a big impact on all of our business models going forward, or just the geopolitical nature or the exogenous events that we're forced to deal with. Resilience is the key.
When you look back at some of those critical points I just listed, or any others that come to mind, is there one that stands out as sort of the toughest to navigate, as the one that you thought, I don't know that we're going to make it out okay?
Well, the toughest clearly was the pandemic. And we went in the early days of the pandemic from just finishing the strongest year our company ever had in history, in fact, strongest year our company ever had in aviation history, to literally 60 days later having virtually no traffic on our airplanes. And in fact, our revenues were not only zero, they were negative because we were having to give money back to customers for the deposits they had, hundreds of millions of dollars a week during that time frame. And so one of the things that I took from the pandemic was the fact that we needed to make certain that the disruption was, first of all, with our own team, communicated in a very transparent way. I think communications is key. Communications is really easy when things are going well for leaders. I think communications when times are tough gets much more challenging, and even worse that when there's so much uncertainty involved. It's really hard to communicate because leaders are trained to let people know what we're going to do. And when you don't know what you're going to do, but yet have to be able to express that in a voice of confidence that we're going to figure it out together, that was the key to managing that wide-scale disruption, at least from my standpoint at Delta.
Simon, when you speak to CEOs now, we talked a little bit about new emerging forces challenging them ahead, but there's some carrying over from the last year as well, certainly the geopolitical issues, supply chain issues. Is there any one issue that just keeps them up top of mind at night, or is it the confluence of all these issues right now that's the biggest challenge?
It's such a great question, Amna. If we look back over the last 30 years, which have been a time of extraordinary commercial activity around the world, governments, federal agencies, banks got very good at managing these long boom and bust cycles, these economic cycles, where planning played a central part in how to anticipate and maximize from those cycles. What's happened with disruption, all these different disruptions, they're more regular, and it's turned not just through one disruption, but multiple disruptions layering on top of each other, it's turned this rolling sea into a very choppy sea for executives as they navigate their businesses through these times. To your question, is there any one issue that's dominant? No, there isn't. There are a number of really important issues, any one of which could deserve to be number one on a list, whether it's, for instance, supply chain issues that continue not because of the pandemic, but now because of the fact that the Panama Canal is low on water, or the Suez Canal, of course, has been interrupted by piracy. These significant, very significant wars that are going on in the Middle East, Russia, Ukraine, geopolitical issues like, will there be a dislocation between China and the West, and what does that mean? In reality, of course, it's impossible to completely dislocate because the two sets of economies are so combined. But it's the multiplicity of these things that layer on top of each other that have turned what used to be a rolling sea into a choppy sea. And that really is the principal challenge for business leaders today.
Simon, if I could add
sure,
to
please,
that,
go ahead.
One of the things I also see, and Simon's point is spot on, is also our world is more interconnected than ever before.
Right.
And I think the fact that you could have a disruption, as you were talking, in the Suez Canal or in the Panama Canal that could have effects in many parts of the world is something that's new for us in terms of the speed and the timing and the impact that the disruption creates. And I think that's something that we certainly saw during the pandemic, where everything was stopped and we were all disconnected. But as we all come back together, we've come back even faster. And I think technology is a huge enabler of that, which is great. But there are also, there's challenges that come about when you are so interconnected to what's happening around the world. And Delta, as the largest airline in the world globally, we operate and fly to the world, and we connect the world. So I see your point in terms of the choppiness also as a function of the connectedness.
Yes, a very good point.
Well, we've got our first questions coming in already, so I think there's a lot of interest around this topic. But Ed, let me put this to you. This gets very specifically to a recent moment of disruption that you couldn't have seen coming. Jerry Lopez has sent this in. Thank you for your question. And he wants to know your point of view on the happenings at Boeing. This is, of course, related to the mechanical issue we're trying to, I think, get to the bottom of, about the door that blew off mid-flight in the Alaska Airlines flight.
Well, we are safety in our business, and I'm not speaking for Delta, excuse me, I'm speaking for the aviation community, is at the core of everything that we do. And while, yes, it's the headline news of the day, for us, safety is the headline news every day at Delta in terms of being prepared and being very mindful of our responsibilities, and it's the core, the foundational element, which everything we do is based on. So we take it extraordinarily seriously. Personally, I can't offer a lot more than what's already out there in the media. I know there's a lot on it. We don't operate the MAX at all. The MAX, that's the model that's had a series of challenges over the last 6-7 years. We certainly don't operate the MAX 9. So I don't have a specific insight as to what happened there. We're working closely and learning from the NTSB and the FAA and Boeing. One of the things that the aviation community has great pride in is that we are the safest form of transportation in the world, bar none. And one of the reasons for that is we have full transparency. So whenever an event happens, there's always great learnings from that as to what we can do better, whether it happens on someone else's airline or it happens in the manufacturing process or happens in the infrastructure. So that's something we'll all learn from and see what happened that we can get better. But I do have confidence that we will learn collectively as an industry, something that will help us be even safer into the future. And we are very fortunate that we're learning this without any loss of life.
That is the key. That's really important to point out, but that also underscores the decisions you're making here are life and death in many cases. And you mentioned these events that can just come up out of nowhere. I'm going to borrow from a conversation Simon and I had earlier, and he raised this point I wanted to put to you, which was your background before becoming CEO was as CFO. And sometimes it seems, to me at least as an outsider, that in these times of disruption and choppy waters, the CEO with the lowest blood pressure wins. Like, that's how to manage through some of these periods. But I wonder if there were specific pressures and strains of the CFO role that prepared you to manage the challenges and understand the broader issues when you stepped into the CEO role.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great point, and there's many characteristics and tools that you learn as being a CFO that have impact longer term as a CEO or a broader business leader into the future. One of those for me was when back in 2005, when I was a CFO, Delta was forced to file for bankruptcy and go through a court restructuring. It was in the aftermath of 9/11, and a lot of the airlines in the U.S. were in a similar situation. And I had to go through, and I led the restructuring as well as not just the CFO, and understanding the details of the business at a level that it's hard to replicate in most any other functional area was very helpful. The analytics skills that are key to making decisions. I think one of the things that a great CFO does is a great CFO becomes a very good decision maker. And that doesn't mean a CFO necessarily has a great gut or instinct. I mean, that's important too, but you learn from making decisions. One of the things that has helped me in my career was, even before I came to Delta, I spent some time at PepsiCo. And at PepsiCo, the reason I went to PepsiCo to work there, and I was the CFO of their international snacks business, Frito-Lay, one of the reasons I went there was to hone in on my decision-making capabilities, because decision-making is a learned skill. It's not something that people are born as good. We're all born, right? But not necessarily born as good decision makers. And one of the things you learn about making decisions is you gather the information, you move quickly, you don't sit and belabor a decision. You have to make it at the time and not be afraid of making course corrections when they occur. And over time, you find that your batting average gets better, because if you make decisions quickly enough, oftentimes they can be a small enough decision that rather than it's saved to be an indecision, because if you don't make a decision, by the way, that's a decision too. So I think the more that we can continue to focus on the quality and the development of our team in terms of decision-making capability, getting them confident in making their decisions, getting them confident in course correcting, getting them confident to learn when things went right, learn when things didn't go right, and what we can do better, it's going to help all our businesses.
Simon, how do you...
May I just pick up on that? It's such a great insight, Ed. What I'd say is, from our own experience, having the privilege of a front row seat with our clients in dealing with some of their, biggest challenges and opportunities, but also through this sort of deep dive through our disruption work is that the evidence absolutely bears out at exactly what you've just said, which is that one never has perfect information. Decisions have to be made within perfect information. And indeed, moving to action quickly is actually one of the hallmarks of the best leaders. I see it day to day in our client work. I profoundly see it in our disruption analysis, where we profile the best performing firms. The ability to do it nearly right, but do it now is one of the hallmarks of great leaders. And indeed, then not being a hostage to a decision if circumstances change. So pivoting, having the confidence to then take a different decision if a different fact set presents itself. And one of the other insights, interestingly enough, picks up on something you said a few minutes ago around communication. When we look at the best performing companies, which of course are typically led by the best performing leaders, they're chief communication officers, not just chief executives. They actually do paint the picture of why this is the right strategy for the company, paint the picture as to what it takes to fulfill that opportunity. And this ability to narrate it and communicate why it's the right strategy, once again, seems to be a feature of the best leaders with the best performing companies. So I completely agree with you about the need to make a decision, and then, even if you need to make a different decision, have the confidence to do that.
And you know, Simon, the other thing that it enables, sorry, the other thing it enables is something I think we all learned during the pandemic as a leader, is also to be humble about continuing to learn, to be willing to be vulnerable, and to be exposed in times of crisis, in times of disruption, that, you know, that it's affecting us. And what you'll find is your teams are much more interested in following someone that they see that's real, that's vulnerable, that's human, that has humility, and that continues to learn from, than a leader that has all the answers. And so I think there's the behavioral characteristics today of the great CEOs in our country, in our world, are starting to morph their behavioral characteristics, not just their technical skills.
I wonder too, the degree to which you think those disruptive forces, the pandemic in particular, forced a kind of creativity and out of the box thinking. I mean, we saw that in news, where suddenly I was anchoring the show from my basement at home, and we figured out this is a thing we can do. Not that we want to keep doing it, but it is possible to do this work in different ways. And Simon, one of the things that stuck out to me from your latest survey was I found that CEOs are less likely to say their employees tend to be stuck in their ways. That is down 19 points. I wonder how you look at that. We think about disruption as a negative force, but can it also force more efficient, more creative ways of doing the business?
I think that's absolutely right, Amna. I think that we all discovered that actually there were different strategies that could be employed, value-creating strategies that could be employed for corporations, but also down to individual employee engagement, that maybe where it's possible, because of course in many jobs it's not possible, but where it's possible, a hybrid working arrangement allows us to recruit and retain the best talent. So I think everybody's working around that. You know, there's lots of studies now that show that from a productivity point of view, people in the office who do those types of jobs are more productive on average, but actually there's more to it than that. How do we explore ways to create employee engagement and tenure and the texture of relationship between employees and the company? I think also for business leaders, this whole sense of the need to pivot, the need to be agile, the need to make sure that one is taking advantage of all the opportunities. And one of the great, maybe the major disruption of our time at the moment is the possibility that comes with generative AI. And when we did this last disruption survey, what I expected to see was that generative AI would be top of CEOs' anxieties. Actually, what it came out as being was the number one opportunity. On average, CEOs saw the possibility of using generative AI, large language models, in their businesses was the biggest opportunity they had. But so interesting as well, one of their greatest personal anxieties, one of the things that really kept them awake at night, was the fact that they personally didn't feel that they had all the skills they needed to really understand and explore what that meant for them. So I do think this post-pandemic sense of a broader range of options being available is making all business leaders maybe think more broadly about the opportunities for their business, opportunities to run a great business, but also the opportunities to grow their business, which of course for those of us with outside investors is always something that looms large in the minds of CEOs.
And how does Delta look at this? Because this gives me a chance to actually point out you came out of one of the toughest periods for any airline in the pandemic. And just last week, we're named the top airline last year for on-time flights, and more than 1.6 million flights in 2023. Delta arrived on time in over 84% of those. On a personal note, let me just say thank you for that. Someone who travels quite a lot. But this gets to a question that came in from Andrew Dewick as well. He's asking about how you not just adapt to the disruption, but capitalize on it in this new norm.
Yeah, well, that's a great point, and thank you for those comments. When we went through the pandemic, it was a tough period, no question about it. And there was a lot of disillusionment, there was a lot of anxiety, there was a lot of stress. And as we were going through it, one of the things that I was very clear with our team that we need to make certain that while we were managing what we knew, we had to be prepared for the rebound on the other side at the same time. That we weren't going to cut so deep that we were unable to get to the other side and actually capitalize. You never want to say you're capitalizing on the pandemic, but you're learning from the pandemic and positioning yourself so that you're better on the other side. We didn't go through all this suffering for no reason. There was a reason we wanted to learn something for it. So for me, there were many, many things that we did differently on the other side that have allowed us to rebound. And we'll be reporting our results on Friday of this week, so I'm in a dark period, I can't talk about them, but what I can say safely is that we are going to post for 23 the highest revenues in our company's history, only a couple years following the disruption that we just went through because of a lot of that. And one of the things that was core to me and core to our team going through that, Amna, was the focus on wellness. You know, COVID hit us in such a hard way, and in our business, clearly. And so whether it was how we make certain that our planes were absolutely clean, how our environment was a safe environment, not just to operate the plane, but actually to physically exist in the plane. The fact that we blocked the middle seats for the whole pandemic so that only airline did that, so all the customers felt comfortable as they're starting to return to flight. And the wellness to me extended then not just to the physical wellness, but the emotional well-being of our people. And we've instituted significant programs on the other side of COVID to deal with people's stress and anxiety coming out of it. We've put financial wellness programs in place that are one of a kind in industry to help our people through the financial implications and as well as the societal. So the pandemic impacted us in every aspect of wellness and well-being of our people. And we know, because we're a service business, if our people aren't they're feeling their full self, if there's something that they're struggling with, they're not going to be able to deliver the performance we need for our customers in a heavy service industry. So that was something to me, that's something that we will live and continue to build on ever more into the future.
Ed, you talk a lot about investing in your employees and how they're at the core of everything you do. Simon, I'm curious if that is something you are hearing, especially coming out of the pandemic, hearing more and more from CEOs about that mental health support, about the wellness support, about making sure your employees are okay to do the work you need them to do.
Yeah, we absolutely are on there. And in fact, one of the things that attracted me to Delta and your leadership, Ed, is you talk a lot about values and you talk a lot about your people. You know, we say at AlixPartners that we're people-centric and client-focused and values-based. And you talk a lot about how by looking after your people look after your customers, and ultimately they look after the company. And I'm seeing more and more people understanding the wisdom and power of that. So yes, Amna, I think that people are understanding. To the couple of minutes ago, we were talking about hybrid working, for instance. Even if hybrid working for those people that have the privilege of being able to do that because of the nature of their jobs, even though it may not be the most productive way of doing a job, that actually that isn't the only lens to look through it. If it makes their living their lives possible to strike the balance that creates the possibility of doing this job in the longer term, creates better mental health, creates a better balance for them and therefore the company. I think people are really starting to understand the power of that. And the pandemic was such a seismic shock for all of us. I think we've all now taken this more seriously, of course, but understood the real power of understanding how to support our colleagues best in this way.
I want to get into more of these specific challenges around supply chain and workforce and so on, but you've led us so nicely to this idea about values that I want to dig in while we're here. And I was thinking about, Ed, in particular, the moment you faced under pressure from the students who'd survived the mass shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High to break, for any company to break ties that they had with the National Rifle Association, which you did. There was a deal of some kind for NRA members that you ended right away. You faced backlash for that from the NRA and politicians who ended a tax break. And you said at the time, refusing to budge from your stance, you said that our values are not for sale. And I just wonder if you could reflect on that moment now, all these years later. How tough a decision was that to make?
Well, that was a tough decision, and no question about it. And we've had subsequent opportunities to weigh in as society continues to be somewhat divisive, and business leaders wind up getting thrown into the middle of political and societal challenges. But at that time, when we saw what had happened, and we saw the fact that the NRA was kind of using our program without, again, there wasn't a whole lot of knowledge or awareness within the company. It wasn't like we were promoting the NRA. It was just a discount to go to a convention once a year. It was relatively tiny. In fact, less than 100 people even used the discount. It was so tiny, but it caused this unbelievable seismic, kind of the fact that we're breaking forces, because we were thrown then into the political side of that. And what I spent a lot of time with our team and thinking it through. And every time I saw what the other side of that was, the fact that our people were distraught over what had happened, not just our business leaders. We had to speak on behalf of our community at large. And we have a big operation in Florida. We have a big operation in South Florida. We had people asking us how we could possibly have some type of affiliation with an organization that was not addressing the issue in the way that many people thought they should, and made that decision. A lot to learn from that process, but I basically let my heart speak for me when our values weren't for sale. And we stand for people, we stand for connectedness, we stand for our kids, and we all have to. The leaders in the corporate world today have more, not only credibility, I think also more. The expectations are higher from our customers and our employees and our communities than ever before to express a point of view. We have to be careful. It's a dangerous and very, very slippery slope. We paid a price. I paid a very big price, tens of millions of dollars that the Georgia tax authorities levied on us for something that because of what we did. But the good news on the other side of that, the 2 years later, they came around and they said, we'll give you that tax break now. So I wasn't going to let any kind of monetary influence or any kind of political pressure influence my judgment as to who we are and what we stand for.
Simon, 79% of CEOs in your survey, 79% said they feel pressured to take a position on social issues. And we should know disruption is not just economic or global, right? It's social, especially in terms of what we're going through right now. How did they decide when and how and if to weigh in?
And this is the key question, Amna. I think it's, and Ed has just given us a great reference point on this. There's so much pressure to comment. And of course, there's a wide range of topics on which one could comment. What we found at AlixPartners working with our clients is actually the choice of what to speak about is so important. What to speak about has to either be core to one of your stakeholder groups, employee groups, customer groups, or really it has to be core to your purpose. Now, I loved it when I saw, Ed, you said, our values are not for sale. It just talks about the values-based decision-making delta. And I think this is the point. I think rooting one's commentary in things that are either core to the purpose of the enterprise or incredibly important to a constituency that is affected by one's enterprise. And so, but when we look at the sort of anxiety of CEOs on, this is one of the big drivers, which is what to speak about and what to say. There are so many things that could be commented on, but choosing to do that, choosing what to comment on is so important. But I think the core is to make sure that one comments on things that are actually central to the purpose of the company.
Thank you so much both for your thoughtful responses on this. I feel like this is something gets a lot of attention. We don't often get to hear from leaders in your position so candidly on. So thank you for that. I would love to jump back into some of the specifics because we're getting a ton of questions coming in. So let's get back to those. Here's a question to Ed that harkens back to the earlier note Simon mentioned about AI in particular and automation. Ed Zaid White sends in this question. Thank you for that. AI and automation are transforming various industries is what's meant to be said there. How is Delta looking to leverage these technologies to improve efficiency, customer experience, and operations? How do you view AI?
Well, I view AI as the next evolution of our digital strategies, our digital tools and technologies for our people as well as for our customers. I don't look at AI as something that we don't already know about. We've, in the airline business, have been using predictive models and predictive technologies, which essentially is at the core of a lot of the generative AI that we're seeing today for many years in terms of how we price our inventory of product, because it's constantly moving and shaping and analyzing, because the day that that plane takes off, well, you can't sell it anymore, and how do you get the optimal amount of revenue, all the way to how we run our business. The reason we are the most reliable airline in the sky is because we use technology for predictive engine analysis, and we get a lot of information from our planes, a lot of information from our cockpits. We're not telling how the state of our fleet is, the quality of our product, and our maintenance capabilities have been enhanced. So there's a lot of technology. It's deep. It's the lifeblood. I say second to our people, technology is who we are. We're a tech company. People think of us as a transportation company. Yes, that's what we do. But we're an experience company, and we're a tech company at the core. And so as generative AI has come on the scene over the last year, we've also been working, and we have been working previously. We're working currently on the applications and the capability to bring it to life. One of the things that to me is important is getting big companies that have scale ready for it. I mean, there's a lot of localized use cases where you can kind of have a whiz-bang wow experience with a generative AI model, but it's hard to scale. And scaling in a large enterprise means that you have to have clean data that you're feeding the model and the programming. You have to have efficient technology infrastructure that can actually adapt to it, because then what are you going to do with the information it gives you? And so to me, it's kind of changing a lot of the vision and the strategy for the future as compared to the here and now. But I see a world where we're freed up from making much better decisions. We'll still always have humans at the core of decision making. I get questions all the time. Well, does that mean that the computers are going to be running the planes and flying the planes and making decisions on their own? No, we'll never get to that at Delta. We'll always have human intervention and human leadership in terms of managing the machines. But it's going to give better tools and techniques and technologies to our people to make smarter decisions, better information for our customers, and hopefully a more efficient operation for our investors.
Simon, AI is the latest thing that CEIs need to be able to understand and to leverage and to deploy. There's always something, right? And there's an idea coming in the questions about this issue of requalifying for your role, for your tenure as CEO, especially as technology emerges and challenges emerge. So as CEOs who have both been in your roles, I believe it's pointed out to me here for the exact same time, you have both been in your roles for 8 years and 1 month. Congratulations. How do you encourage requalifying for executive roles in the organization in light of all these rapidly changing conditions?
Right. Well, I think the half-life of a skill set is getting shorter and shorter. And it's not just because of generative AI, but this is another example of that. And so I think for all executives, not just chief executives, one has to be curious and keep on learning to stay, or to keep up at least, with the developments and therefore understanding the opportunities. I remember that Ginny Rometty, when she was CEO of IBM a number of years ago, did some really quite deep analysis on tracking the half-life of a skill set, and it did show alarmingly the rate at which it was getting shorter and shorter. I think when one looks at generative AI, we've known that in the distant universe somewhere, there's been this asteroid. Large language models, we used to call them machine learning. That's been going on for a long time, but all of a sudden we've looked up and seen this planet killer asteroid, just about to hit our planet, thinking, oh my goodness, it's going to transform every job in every company and every industry. And what are we going to do about it? And I think that it's just, as Ed said, the latest example of a transformation, but it is one of those things, whether it's the wheel or the printing press or the plow, it's one of those moments where the stakes have suddenly gone up. So how to understand the opportunity that generative AI offers, as well as some of the challenges that need to be mitigated. I think that CEOs do need to, I would recommend, and I do to our clients, CEOs need to play with the technology just to start to get familiar with with the opportunities offered by it. So interesting that Microsoft, for instance, are now putting a Copilot key on the keyboards that go with their hardware, because of course what they're showing is that it's not that ChatGPT is going to replace everybody's job, but it is going to become a co-worker for people's jobs. So how do we think of using it as a co-pilot, excuse the pun, given I'm chatting to Ed from Delta, but a co-pilot in enhancing our jobs? And early returns show that certainly in jobs that are more procedural, that generative AI can cause significant efficiencies in the same way that robotics, for instance, has in the manufacturing process. So this whole principle of cobotics, how human capital and robotics together can achieve much more by way of efficiency. So to the core question, Amna, I think that CEOs have to stay relevant, have to be curious, have to learn, but there's a whole bunch of experience and wisdom that goes with senior corporate leadership, which is principally why those people have those senior leadership roles, but they have to make sure they keep up with the developing technology to understand the potential of it.
Ed, do you agree with that? What's the latest skill set you're working on right now?
Oh, I do agree with it. When you mention that, 8 years as a CEO, I think back to when I started. 8 years on one hand doesn't sound long ago, but in CEO terms, it's probably decades ago, and how the role has changed over time. I've told our team that one of the things I love about my job is that I get to learn every day, and I get to deploy every day those learnings, and to me that's exciting. That's enthusiasm. As you move on in your CEO career, many people ask, well, how many more years you're going to do this? And once you pass a point, well, what's the future look like? And so when I stop learning, that's when I know I'm ready to hand the baton to the next person. So I think learning is key to that. And the bigger the opportunity to learn, the better and the more enthusiastic I am around that. I think that technology, it will continue to be the driving force of our current tenure here, in terms of being a much more engaged company. Because at Delta, we serve 200 million customers a year. And I want all those customers to feel like they have their own personal relationship and connection to Delta, and managing their trip or having knowledge about their status or whatever the case may be. And it's through technology that you break and take such a large scale business down to a localized, individual, one-to-one personalized attention that you get, where you can manage your trip, you can manage your help, you can get human help, you can get tech help, you can get whatever you need. That to me is incredibly innovative, and I think that's going to drive the next decade of progress in our industry.
I'd love to ask you that. Please,
if I may, just to pick up on the CEO tenure, it's interesting. If you look at CEOs of S&P 500 companies, in the last 10 years, the average tenure of a CEO of an S&P 500 has gone from 6 years to 4.8 years. Why is that? Well, I think part of it is the burnout that comes with managing, the multiplicity of different disruptions in a company and an industry. part of it is because some CEOs don't keep themselves current in terms of developments. And so I don't see it getting radically shorter, but I do think it's an absolute priority for business leaders to be curious and be inquisitive and understand the potential of these technologies. They're never going to be digital natives, but they do have to be somewhat digitally fluent.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we see in our roles is that we got to be agents of change, and the world is only as what you know today, and tomorrow it's going to be different. And either you embrace change and you make change your friend, and you pull it forward, or you get changed, or you get left behind. And staying ahead doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be technically smarter or technically more developed. I tell I have a hard enough time just getting through an airport sometimes, managing my own trip. I'm not a digital native at all. For that, I use my kids for that. But understanding that the speed of change is only going to accelerate moving forward, and thinking about how your industry and how your company can be a force for change and a force for good is what keeps me current.
Can I ask on a more personal level, how is it that you keep that edge in continuing to push yourself and continuing to be curious and being ready to handle that change that comes your way? It's sort of an elite status in your industry, and it leads me to think of, like elite athletes. Are you a marathoner? Do you do Sudoku regularly? Like, what is your practice that prepares you for this role?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned athletes, and I've talked a lot about that. I do think these roles are you're an athlete. You have to you have to take care of yourself. You have to kind of be mentally ready to perform. We're on stage all the time. We're in front of the world. You're in front of, at Delta, we got 100,000 employees. I'm in front of the team, and you got to surround yourself with people that keep you excited and engaged with you. And it's not just, we talk too much, unfortunately, about the CEO. CEO is just the person in charge of the company, but it's, the entire leadership team needs to think about themselves in terms of how they stay connected. For me, it's interesting you mentioned about marathons, because I did late in my life, the last one was in 2018, I did run 2 marathons. And I did run the marathons because I knew before taking the role of a CEO that it was going to be the most mentally challenged job I'd ever have, or experience I'd ever have. And I wanted to test my discipline in terms of my thinking and the ability to manage myself, as well as my endurance. And I thought, what better way? And I'm not a runner. I never ran probably more than 4 or 5 miles in my life prior to that point. And I took on and ran my first marathon in New York in 2014. And in getting ready, knowing in the next year I was going to become the CEO of the company, it's just testing myself and testing my capabilities. So yeah, I think there is something to the athlete's form of care and preparation and performance. That's who we are as well.
Simon, what about you? 8 years at the helm, incredibly disruptive times. How do you keep that edge?
I think there's a couple of things, Amna. I think, first of all, one has to be passionate about doing this work. Otherwise, without the passion, it doesn't work. So I think whilst one still feels the passion and is passionate, then it's still possible and still extremely fulfilling and enjoyable. But it's so interesting, Ed made the point about it's not just about the CEO. I so agree with that, what in my own experience, but also in working with clients, that actually the very best achievements are those achieved by teams in team heroics, very rarely individual heroics, the things that pull significant achievements off. Team heroics, team cohesion, the ability of teams to achieve significant milestones is core to the performance of a firm. And so I think that how the team performs, how the team is passionate, how the team remains engaged and striving for the goals that the company has set itself. And I think for all of us, I mean, I've had the privilege, and one of the things I do in my spare time, I have for the last 30 years, been quite involved in arts organizations, opera and also classical music. And I've so admired over 30 years, watching these, world-class musicians or world-class singers go out onto the stage where they have nowhere to hide as they play a violin sonata or sing an aria, and just their how they reach for their very best performance every time. It's been inspirational for me to see that in a different environment. But I think for all of us as teams, how do we do our very best? How do we keep the passion in our work? And if, a number of days on the trot, one wakes up without the passion, then it's probably time for somebody else to take the mantle.
Well, I want to stay loyal to my duty here to funnel the audience questions to you. Ed, this one comes to you from Jeff Arvin. In terms of learning from challenges and disruption, he's curious to know your take on what learnings you took from the recent very public backlash Delta faced when changing the requirements for medallion level status. What you say to that?
Well, we learned a lot. I don't know that I necessarily learned, let me rephrase it. I learned a lot, but I also reaffirmed what I already knew. And the reason we had made the changes was the fact that the brand has been doing extraordinarily well. We are seen in the industry as the premium brand within our space, and the demand was starting to overwhelm our capacity to serve our premium customers in the way we want to serve them, whether it's the Sky Clubs, whether it's the first class seating, whether it's the upgrade capability, many, many things. And we're continuing to move upscale with our brand, but the demand has kind of gotten faster than our capacity to serve. And so we had to implement some changes. And the things I learned from making those changes was, first of all, that we went too fast in making some of the changes, and we needed to dial back and actually make sure we're taking our customers with us on the journey, as well as our employees. And so immediately, when I saw the impact it was having, which I knew it was going to have an impact, but it was a deeper impact than maybe we appreciated. I stepped forward and said, "We're okay, got it. We're not going to do that. We're going to go at this in a different way." And secondly, what I also learned was the deep appreciation for our brand that people had. That was so compelling. I received tens of thousands of emails from customers, and they were not coming from bots, or they were not coming from form letters, send this to the CEO and maybe we'll see something different. These are people just heartfelt expressions for what it means, what Delta has been to them over the years, and their love for our people, their love for what we stand for, and the fact that we were not returning that love back to them. It really made me on the one hand sad, on the other hand really proud of what we've accomplished over the years, and we have to honor that and reward that. So we made some pretty significant changes to modify it on the back end of it, and I hope going forward customers can understand, the one hand, why we were making the changes, because no one wants to stand in line if you're a premium customer. You expect service like that, but on the other hand, not go faster than our customers are ready for.
One of the things we cover a lot here at the NewsHour as well is something I would love to get both of your takes on, because this is not an issue that's behind us, and that is supply chain disruptions. Right. And I know, for years, experts I've talked to say the whole system was based on efficiency, cost efficiency, and also timeline efficiency. All that has shifted now to make sure that you have several sources of parts and manufacturing and so on, not just one, that your national security and global security landscape is something you have to take into consideration. Simon, I'm curious, from the CEOs you talk to, how are they viewing this more broadly? The fact that it seems like you have to take into account all these new forces, which necessarily might slow down and cost more your timeline over a period of time. Who's successful at navigating that, and how?
Yeah, it's great insight on it. Maybe 10 years ago, supply chain was the thing that everybody assumed the head of procurement dealt with and didn't give it much thought. The pandemic hit, of course, and all of a sudden the supply chain not just became an executive agenda item, it became a board agenda item, absolutely central to the survival, let alone the performance of a business. And of course, pre-pandemic, people with global supply chains were very, very focused on just-in-time production, keeping inventories to a minimum, minimizing cost to the extent possible. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. And of course, everybody realized that just-in-time on its own wasn't enough. You needed to have a just-in-case strategy as well. And so that one wasn't a hostage to global supply chains solely, developing regional supply chains, local supply chains where possible to augment. So having alternatives as to how supply chain could be kept current. And of course, even though the pandemic is way behind us, we touched on, the challenges with the Panama Canal and the Suez Canal at the moment, delaying deliveries, the cost of those deliveries going up, which is being passed on ultimately to the customer. How are those managed? These have now become, top 3 agenda items for CEOs and board meeting agenda items. And so it's a critical issue, and I think is going to, as we continue to work through these various disruptions in the world, not just geopolitical, but others too, I think supply chain is going to stay top of the agenda. And in the list of top 5 issues that CEO lay awake worrying about, supply chain often features.
Ed, how do you look at this? I'm thinking back to, I read an interview with the heads of Boeing and Qatar and airlines who said that they think supply constraints are basically going to drag on at least another 5 or 6 years. Do you see it that same way?
I do. I think the supply chain issues for our industry are deep. They were exactly what Simon had referenced in terms of the international global sourcing that we all became quite fluent in, wound up being disconnected during the pandemic, and it was disrupted in a major way. And then on top of that, you layer in some political and economic challenges. You layer in labor cost and inflation, which has driven up the cost to just find people, much less the higher cost in which you need to pay them. And in our business, one of the big challenges we still are facing, and I think we'll continue to face it for some time, is that many of the suppliers, they're not necessarily the Boeings and the Airbuses or the General Electrics in our industry who we're ultimately taking product from. They're tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 suppliers that are deep within those organizations' supply chains that wind up affecting our ability to get our product timely enough. And so I think none of us were able to hold on to the talent through the pandemic. A lot of people retired, and a lot of experienced work left the field, and we're in a period of time having to replicate a lot of that. So I think it's at multiple levels. We'll get it figured out. It's going to take some time. We'll be better for it, but it's going to probably be an overhang that will take several years in our industry and aviation to overcome.
And just to build on that, if I may, of course, with these issues, these disruptions, of course, one of the things that's obvious to all of us, they're not standalone. They affect each other. So take supply chain and geopolitical issues. The narrative between the West and China over the last 18 months has become increasingly toxic. Certainly the political narrative, it seems to be one of the few things, for instance, in the US that Democrats and Republicans can agree on. And so what's happened is not a decoupling exactly, but certainly a distancing between the West and China. Now, how does that play out in a supply chain sense? Well, in a couple of ways. So, the US, for understandable national security reasons, is concerned about exporting certain chips to China in a tit-for-tat world. All of a sudden, certain rare earth elements, which are principally in China, are now less available to the West. And so how do these things play out in a supply chain sense is very real. We have these geopolitical issues spill out into supply chain. It's not just traffic on the Panama and the Suez Canal. And so this is why I think it's so stressful for leadership teams to work out how to make sure there are always options to keep continuity.
And on China in particular, the latest AlixPartners Disruption Index showed 68% of CEOs said that US-China tensions are causing them to adjust their strategy. Does that include you?
It does. It does. It's the one air market in the world that has not come close to recovering. Just about every air market in the world, we're pretty much back to pre-COVID levels of flying, if not even higher. China is a small fraction of where we were pre-pandemic, and many reasons for that. Geopolitical certainly being one of those. But you're talking about connecting the 2 largest economies in the world. People can't even fly. It's hard. There's very few flights that are direct between our two countries. It's going to have long-lasting implications, far beyond aviation, in terms of what that means for the world.
And I agree in terms of long lasting, Ed, because, you think, I mean, just a couple of examples. Take Apple, for instance. I mean, Apple, of course, who've capitalized enormously on the productive capability of China, China sort of having been the shop floor of the world for the last 15 or 20 years, moving production to India, moving production to Vietnam, keeping some production in China, but just this just in case strategy of making sure there are multiple options. But of course, the connection isn't just that China's a very efficient and cost-effective shop floor for the world. Take Volkswagen, for instance. 40% of Volkswagen's sales are in China. So they're not just an important part of the manufacturing base, they're also an extremely important customer base. So when people talk about the prospects of decoupling, I think it's magical thinking. There's no prospect of decoupling because, as Ed says, the two economies are so co-joined, but that there are in these different ways some distancing and some optionality coming in because business leaders, executive teams have to make sure that if geopolitical tensions get worse, that they do have a strategy going forward.
Gentlemen, what about inflation and where the year may take us? I should point out a third of the CEOs in your survey said they still see the potential for recession on the horizon. Do you both share that view, Ed?
Well, sorry, Ed, first, you go ahead.
I'll give my point of view is no, I don't anticipate a recession in our economy in the U.S. I've been asked that question probably weekly for the last 2 years, and everyone anticipates, and I've given the same answer, by the way. I think our consumers are doing reasonably well. I think the labor force is fully deployed. I think rates are continuing to hold up and continuing to rise. I think our economy will manage. I think it's going to be not a hard landing. It'll be some type of landing, but it'll be a soft landing. And I don't anticipate our economy is going to go through a recession. And there may be some technical challenges, but I don't think consumers are going to feel the recessionary effects broadly in our country. And certainly not in our business. We're not seeing that.
Interesting enough, what our survey showed, Amna, was that globally, because of course our survey covers the 8 major economies of the world, over 50%, 54%, I think, of business executives did predict an oncoming recession. But actually, when you look at the US as a constituency, important constituency, only a third of business leaders expected a recession. So I think what the survey demonstrated exactly what Ed just said, that actually there's growing business confidence in the US, that it's unlikely there'll be a hard landing, some sort of soft landing. But the other issue, of course, in the US is we have an election coming up, a very important election this year. And of course, election years tend to have some particular dynamics to them, which makes prediction of these things less possible. But I think there's more confidence, there's more optimism in the US. I think a US recession is unlikely, but interest rates are still high. Interestingly enough, what I think causes business leaders more distress than high interest rates is uncertainty as to where interest rates are going. If people are reasonably sure that interest rates will stay within a narrow range over a forecast period, they can plan accordingly. I think last year it was very stressful for CEOs because it wasn't clear what the Fed was going to do, what was going to happen in terms of rates in reaction to inflation. I think now there's more confidence in terms of the interest rate environment going forward, which is one of the reasons I think that the anxiety about a recession, in the US at least, has reduced.
Ed, can you weigh in on that issue that Simon raised about concerns over the upcoming election? Because, of course, the experts I've talked to all talk about, the potential for more political violence. We are in an incredibly divided time here in the United States. A number of CEOs, the majority of those you surveyed, say they worry about the impact of the election. Are you, and what does that worry mean to you specifically?
Well, as a citizen, of course, you're concerned with how the elections will unfold. We live in divided times, and it will be a tense period as we approach the election process. At Delta, our mission is to bring people together, is to connect, is to make the world a place that people understand more about each other, and thus actually have a deeper gratitude and appreciation for what each of us bring to humanity. And elections force decisions, and on a political scale, it's going to be a challenging time. So I think you'll see in the fall, as we start to approach the run-up to the elections, you could very well see the economy kind of starting to to pause a little bit. I think people will be a little, I don't know if people are going to want to, some people probably want to leave the country because they're not going to want to know, but I think people are going to be frozen trying to see what happens. We saw it, by the way, the last time, 4 years ago. There was a little bit of a slowdown in the economic growth as people were understanding and digesting what the election was going to mean.
Well, as usual, I have way too many questions and not enough time, but I have just enough time to ask you both for closing thoughts, and I can channel one last question to you from our audience. Benjamin, thank you for this question. For both of you, what is it that keeps you awake at night as CEOs of your businesses, and how do you manage that?
I'll start on that. First of all, thank you for having me, and Simon, thank you. It's been a great conversation. I sleep really well at night. I think that's the key to being successful. It's learning what you can manage. I'll answer your question, but I just want to let you know there's nothing that I'm sitting there on a daily basis fretting about because I have great people. I have great teams. I have utmost confidence that we're out there doing our very best at all times. I think the thing that I think more about into the future is about the rate of change. We've just come through a very difficult process in the pandemic. We're still everyone wants to get to what the new normal is. I don't think there's going to be a new normal. I think there's going to be a next phase. And I think the new normal is the continued evolution and change that we've spent a lot of time in this conversation talking about. Global level, local level, technological level, economic level, and all CEOs need to be staying ahead of that change and actually not mired in what their thoughts about what happened, about their anticipation, how they prepare for the next.
Simon, how well do you sleep?
Yeah, I sleep pretty well most of the time for mostly the same reasons as Ed, and thank you, Ed, for being in this conversation too. It's been a real pleasure. I always realize that on any given day something might come up and I won't actually know what to do, or it'll be a new problem and it won't be obvious to me exactly what the next step would be. But the reason that I do typically sleep well is, like Ed, I feel I've got a great team. I think that the team has the resources and the experience in it together to make the right decision. So the strength of the team is actually what enables me to sleep well most of the time. And one of the privileges of my role is I get to brag on behalf of the team sometimes in terms of what we managed to get right. But I think this pace of change issue is real. I do think the reason that the average tenure of a CEO has gone down is that the multiplicity of issues layer on top of each other, and I think it's it's wearing on people. And so I think that having, to mention, Ed, you've done some marathons. This is a marathon and not a sprint. And I always say to my colleagues and also to our clients, look, this is a long game, and sustaining oneself through it is important, because on any given day, something new might come up, but having the confidence to lean into it and then not feeling that one is a hostage of that decision, but have the ability to make a different one when circumstances change is critical.
As I say, way too many things to talk about, not nearly enough time, but thank you so much to both of you. Thanks also to the audience for joining and for your questions. Simon and Ed, thank you for your candor and for your insights, and most of all for your time. It's been such a pleasure to be in conversation with you both. Simon Freakley, thank you. Ed Bastian, thank you.
Thank you, Amna. Thank you, Ed.